One of the interesting things about music now and where we are in music history
Yeah.
is watching hip hop artists get old.
Yeah, right.
Watching techno artists get old.
Hip Hop 50.
And yeah, last year was a big year. And so
Yeah.
it's like, how do you do that gracefully
Yeah.
and take your music to a place that feels like at that particular age it makes sense, or everybody's not like, this is an older person trying to be what they used to be.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever run into that? Like, you've had such a career now.
Yeah.
That Carl Craig that started techno music is a different Carl Craig than we're talking to today. And how are you different? And what are those, your essence is still there, but a lot of things have changed. How do you see yourself now?
I mean, with rap, we can just look at Andre 3000 as an example.
That's a great
He's a guy who just said, like, you know what? I mean, you're in your 50s. What are you going to rap about? Prostate, that kind of stuff. What are you going to, and that's on the real. It is on the real. But I'm reading, I'm finishing Rick Rubin's book. And, he talks about never losing your childlike qualities and stuff. And that's really important. I see that with, my friends and stuff, that some of them are just still big kids. And it is important to still have that big kid thing, because you had that big kid thing when you were 18.
Right.
Putting your hands on the first keyboard that you put your hands on, the first drum machines or whatever. And it's got to continue. But what's the guy's name from Montreal that was the kind of mix of singer and poet? He's not around anymore, but he had kind of a comeback about 10 years ago. I think that's the point where probably rap is going to be less, hey, what's up, blah, 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 to making your voice real deep and just talking through the whole thing, Right. So Busta Rhymes, I mean, he's got the voice for it. He doesn't have to be, rapping at 200 words per second. He can just slow it down, and that'll be that next level, and it'll sound incredible.
And it feels real and believable.
Yeah.
What about you? Are you still in touch with that kid part of you that when you were young and discovering music is still there?
Yeah, I try to. I had this thing that I was doing on Twitter, but I now just do it to my kids, because I realized that with my kids, I want them to benefit first. Before I always thought of everything as being a community service or something.
Right.
So I would do this thing called Uncle Carl's Pro Tips. And Uncle Carl's Pro Tips is me documenting my thoughts when I'm on the road, because when you're on the road, it gets boring, man. Sometimes you're just waiting for some excitement to go. Somebody just try to open up the door on the plane or something, so I get some sort of excitement. No, please don't. But I need some type of excitement. So It's like I will put my thoughts into tweets that might be about audio technology or just any crazy thing that's on my mind, and that it documents it for me later, so that I see what like a diary, but I've never been a diary person,
right?
But it's like a diary, like a public diary, and I can always go back and say, okay, I remember exactly what I was thinking, where I was when I wrote that, versus I needed a reminder. I needed something to remind me of what I was thinking of,
right.
And many of those of what I document is more free than it is a restriction. And also I was using it in my art as well. So like my piece at Dia, the party after party, there's a point in the after party where there's whispers that are coming out of different speakers, and there are things I posted on Twitter.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, so you could actually, if you're not subscribed, but if you're not kicked out of my account, then you can go back and you can see exactly when I thought this. So I can actually go back to say like, okay, oh shoot, I remember I said that. Let me go back. And then I go back to, 2000 during COVID, and it's like, oh yeah, no, it would be pre-COVID because that came out pre-COVID. So it would be pre-COVID. So it might be 2019, 2018, something. Yeah.
So looking at your life that way
Mhm.
and thinking about your life when music started to take a hold of you as this is what I'm going to do. How do you process the world differently than you did then? And have you slowed it down a little bit? Has it sort of come to a place where you are a lot more contemplative? Not saying that you weren't there then, but I'm going to imagine then the forward momentum was significant. And maybe that momentum, the passion's still there, but the speed has maybe changed.
It's faster now than it was.
Really?
Yeah, it is.
Why?
I've always had the idea. I've always kept the 7-year itch in the
Okay.
back of my mind, right? Everything's a cycle. So, every year you have, well, now we might not have winter as long as what we had.
You got that right.
We have a longer summer or whatever, but we have cycles that we deal with. We have to deal with every day, the cycle of life. But the cycle of marriage or relationships, we call it 7-year itch, right? So there's cycles in fashion, there's cycles in music, there's cycles in everything. Even when we talk about frequencies,
Oh,
right.
right.
When you talk about frequencies, there's another term for frequency, which is cycles.
Yeah.
So everything's a cycle, right? So if I have low points in my career, I know it's just part of the cycle.
Do you get afraid when that happens?
Nah.
You know how some people talk about how they really freak out when that part of their cycle shows up.
Yeah, it's ego.
So you can wait it out and be pretty zen about the whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, I might not have the cash to wait it out, but
It's a different conversation.
it's a different
altogether.
conversation. But as long as, there's enough that's happening,
Right.
the closest to being completely dogged out was, when you couldn't work during COVID.
Right.
Luckily, the government came into play and they said, okay,
Yeah.
here's a little bit of dollars, and
To
that
get
was
you by, yeah.
that was cool. But that was a scary time. That was like, okay, what the heck? It's not just you're thinking about who's going to live or die. You're just thinking if your career is done.
Right.
What's the next step of being able to go to that point. So that was a cycle that I didn't understand that was going to happen. But I mean, you get on in a situation where I lose my hearing, my career's done. I get in a situation where I lose my sight. Maybe the career's not done, but I can't do it in the same way.
Exactly.
Lose a limb.
Do you ever think about your career being over?
Yeah, of course. I have to. That's part of my defense mechanism, and I'm not a rainy day kind of guy,
Right.
but that I think that concept, like tomorrow it might not happen the same way, so I got to do it today.
Right.
So I have to do it. I've gone through that thing of being really super picky about what I was going to do, and then realize that even when you don't work during that time, you're not even creative during that time. You're kind of wasting time.
Right.
So my time is maximized maybe a bit too much, especially after COVID. It ramped up. It ramped up to a point of almost what it was 12 years ago. 12 years ago, I could do 3 dates in 3 different countries on the same day. I mean, it was kind of crazy like that.
My brain's like processing that. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, when you're in Europe, it's
can do that.
easy to be able to do it. And, when
Do you
people,
like working at that pace?
not necessarily. it's great for the ego because you can go back later and say, yeah, you remember, yeah, I used to be famous. I was so famous that,
Aren't you still famous? I think you are famous.
It's a different kind of fame, So there are people who know me from my generation, and then there are people who know me from the new generation.
Right.
So it's just not Taylor Swift famous.
Right.
And I would never, ever want to get to the point of being Justin Bieber, Taylor Swift, Michael Jackson, Eminem, any of those guys that when you're not nice to people, it becomes an international incident instead of it just being like you just don't feel like you have the time
right
for somebody. And with our jobs, when we're at our job,
right,
sometimes when I used to work at Art Van Furniture, sometimes it's just like, God, quit asking me to do stuff. And it's like, hold on a minute, let me go to the bathroom and just take a break for a second, or let me find some way out of this. But when you get to those levels of fame, people don't want to understand that you need some time to yourself, that the amount of time to yourself doesn't feel like the amount of time that you really should have.
Right.
Is the amount of time that you have to steal time.
Right.
And when you have kids, you have to steal time because the kids would just be on your ass.
Well, they don't really care about you and your time, right?
No, they don't. They're just like, I want this right now, and blah 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 blah. And then you're worried about, how time works and that doing something for a split second at the wrong time could mean losing a finger.
Yep, exactly. Well, then there's that. It's interesting. I've interviewed a couple of people, artists who have children, and I would say to them, how has becoming a parent changed you? And I remember a couple of them in particular saying, I became a much more efficient musician and writer because the moments of time were so fleeting as to when you could actually create, and that they realized in some cases, yeah, I can actually write a song quicker than I thought I could
Sure.
because I don't have the luxury of time. So it's kind of interesting when you talked about time and how you look at time and how you spend it. But I would think you'd have to be your ability to compartmentalize has to be pretty strong to be able to say, okay, now I'm going to sit here and I'm going to do this creative thing, which I don't know. Could you do that? Can you say, now I have to just stop this and I'm going to go be creative now?
No, I like how Quincy Jones talked about, you're waiting for that time for God to walk in a room. Actually, God to just walk through the room.
Right.
So I'm more in that in that sense, because I think that if you can write on command, then it's the equivalent of writing for jingles.
Right.
And I never could write for jingles. That's not my thing. My thing is to find that point where I can just flourish. And this is one of the things in Rick Rubin's book that he talks about is like, if it's here, don't stop it. So if you waited a year for the ideas to come through, then it can't be 9 to 5. It's got to be until those ideas just empty, and then you just go on your way, because you never know. It's going to be another year. It might be another 2 years until you get it.
Right.
Another example that he used of somebody that he knows is that the family knew that if Dad got up from the dinner table and just walked away and didn't say anything, that there was no reason to get upset about it. He was going into his space, studio, or in front of a piano or whatever, because it had to come out. That had to happen,
Right.
So that's the world that the mentality that I live in. So if I'm dry for 2 years and I'm dry for 2 years, I can't force it, because if I try to force it, it's going to probably sound like something that I've done before, and that's not the goal. The goal
Right.
isn't to repeat myself. The goal is to continue on and progress.
Well, the more life you have, the more you've created, the more music you've done. Does that get to be more challenging to continue to be different, create things, and not repeat yourself? You've created a lot of music, and so it seems like it could get daunting the more life you have and the more music you've made to sort of subscribe to that mindset.
I mean, when you get new records that come in through here, new songs that you hear, most of it, I'm sure you're like, somebody's done this before. You know, I've heard this before, you know?
It happens, yeah.
If you follow the 12-bar blues rule, you've heard it for the last 50, 60 years.
Absolutely.
You know, you've heard it longer than that. You've heard it from Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf and stuff. And somebody else, I was watching Stevie Ray Vaughan videos, and Stevie Ray Vaughan was amazing, but you heard it before. You know, even when he was doing it, you heard it before, 30 years before he was doing it. Yep. And now with whoever's in that space, they're doing things that is not original. They just kind of twisted it. Right. So when we're 18 and we hear it, it's brand freaking new, you know? Yep. So when I was 16, it was Stanley Jordan and Eddie Van Halen and Wayne Malmsteen. You know, because I come from playing guitar very badly, so those were the new things to me. And of course, you know, that technique of playing two hands on the fretboard was something that came in at the time. And I saw a video of somebody before Eddie Van Halen that was using two fingers on the fretboard. He was playing Black Napkins. It was Frank Zappa.
Oh, okay, there you go.
Yeah. So Black Napkins, that was from Zoodalores album, was in 1976. And I think Van Halen came out, 79 or 78 or something. So it was already somebody that was doing it. So, I hear techno records, and I can hear the differentiations that a lot of people ignored when they said, "Oh, techno sounds the same," or "Oh, house sounds the same," or "Oh, rap sounds the same." You can hear within the frequencies, within the grooves, within, you know, the riffs, and it's like, okay, I hear what's different about it. But as I get older, of course, it's like somebody did that in 1990. You know, somebody did that in 2001. Somebody did that, and, you know, I can, you know, that was a Derek May thing, you know, or that was a Kevin Saunderson thing, or Juan Atkins did that way back in the day, you know. Right. So it all it takes a lot for me to say, okay, this is hot. You know, like when I hear music that people give me as demos, it's got to sound like something I could never make, in order for me to say, okay, you know what, this is worthy for me to press this on vinyl. You know, I would never make that. If it sounds like I can make it, then why am I going to put it out? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, that's an awfully high bar.
I mean, come on, me.
It is.
I know. What am I going to do? What am I going to compare it to?
But when I think about it, it's like how much music you must end up listening to, people that want you to be involved in their music, and how much of it really hits you that way is to be so far and few between.
I think people got scared too to send me stuff. Oh, because, you know, if you don't hear from me, it's a rejection. That's just the way it is, because I'm not the kind of guy that says, "Hey, this sucks."
Right.
I'm not putting it out. Click. You know,
news is not good news.
No news is
not good news.
Just go on to somebody else. Go on and move on. You know. It's like when I'm at parties, I try to leave without saying goodbye. And part of that has to do with when I DJ, I hate when people come up to me and they tap me on the shoulder and they wave goodbye. It's like, oh my God, people leaving a gig. I don't want to know that you leave. I want to know, I want to know later that you just had a magic trick and you just disappeared. It's like, great. Great, that's fine. Thank you for coming. I don't need to know that you're leaving.
Well, now that we started talking about techno music, and we are wrapping up Black History Month here, I want to talk about, where did techno music come from? And I know that there's been a million articles and a million things written about it. Yeah. where did it come from? We know a lot of the players, yourself included, and Juan Atkins and Derek May and Kevin Saunderson, the Belleville Three. We heard all these stories, but where did it start before them? Where did they get it from? Where did Mike Banks? It's like I was sort of looking for more of a definitive answer as to, we know they started making this incredible music, but how were they influenced? Where did this come from?
For those early interviews with Juan where he pretty much rejected Motown, right? Because techno, the idea of electro and techno was a new thing. But I go back to when Motown brought the first Moog synthesizer into the studio, and they were using sounds on Diana Ross' Love Child, on the Supremes' Love Child, you know, that whole intro. The mood of techno comes from Papa Was a Rolling Stone. The mood and the technical side of Motown comes from when Stevie Wonder was putting his hands on synthesizers and stuff.
Marvin Gaye used the 808.
He used in Sexual Healing. Yeah, he used 808 in that. I think they were called Mandre, who was on Motown. That was a whole electronic thing. Had a huge record in Detroit. I don't know if it was anywhere else, called Freakin's Fine.
Oh.
That was a Motown record, you know. So there's a lot of the Motown thing that influenced us growing up that we just put into the music. So, you know, the argument comes about Kraftwerk. And, you know, Kraftwerk was a huge influence on us because of the Electrifying Mojo. With the first Kraftwerk song I remember is Pocket Calculator, which, of course, 30 years later, the record came out in 81, so we're over 40 years on that. But I realized that it was like popcorn. It was a novelty record. And I was taking that seriously because I heard that record when I was 12. I took it seriously. But it was numbers that made the impact because Planet Rock is based on numbers in Trans Europe Express, 808, you know, as you're saying. And I don't remember which Kraftwerk book it is, but they hired Norman Whitfield's engineer to engineer on We Are the Robots, the Man Machine album.
How about that?
So I think he's from Chicago. I don't remember if he was ever in Detroit, but the Detroit influence is there because he worked for Norman Whitfield, who did all this Detroit, you know, Temptations and stuff. He was the main guy for the Temptations.
Absolutely.
So it all goes back to Motown. I was having me, Carl Cox, and Lil Lewis were in Barcelona a few years back, and we were having this like really heavy debate. Lewis can be real intense. And Carl and I had said, hey, you know that French Kiss is a techno record, right? He was like, no, it's not techno, it's house. It's house, it's house. You know, he got really upset about it. And he started talking about the roots of house and how house is this and how house is that. And he's talking about Motown records.
Really?
It's like, Lewis, those are Motown records. Those are Detroit records. You know, I was all house. I was doing this. I was doing that. We were playing this record. We were playing that record. And it's like, okay, you know, you're playing Diana Ross, The Boss. I mean, that's a Motown record. You know, Love Hangover, Motown record. You know, these are, so the roots of most of the music that we're doing in all popular music is really rooted in Motown. And Mark Anestis and I, Mark Anestis from Basic Channel, and I were having this big debate. And this is when I was more on the Kraftwerk tip. And it's like, okay, you know, everything you hear Kraftwerk in everything, you know, because Planet Rock's influence, everything. He's like, no, you're hearing Sly and Robbie and that stuff.
Oh,
You're
right.
hearing all dub reggae and a lot of influence. And I had to go back, and a lot of rap is based on Jamaican music.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the early Jamaican music were covers of Motown records. So somehow Motown comes back.
In all of it.
In all of it. Somehow Motown always comes back to what we're doing in modern music has some Motown influence.
All right, let's go to, that's very fascinating, by the way, because I've never heard an answer like that, and it makes complete sense, especially if you're in Detroit.
Yeah.
And let's talk about Detroit and how we find in Europe that it is not acknowledged that techno came from Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
And I read the article in the New Yorker about Frankfurt and this museum that they opened called MOMAN, the Museum of Modern Electronic Music, and didn't credit Detroit with the invention, creation of techno music. How can that be when there's so much information out there that leads right back? The names are here. All of you guys are here. How can that be? And is that as prevalent as it would appear to be from that article, and for them to basically create a museum in its honor and say it was created there and not here?
So I've done something with them. They acknowledge that we exist. Okay. They acknowledge our impact. Definitely.
They do.
Maybe not in their in the statement, their museum statement might not be as defined,
Right.
but they do acknowledge it. Now, in Germany, they have this fight already that is the start of German techno. So some schools say it's Berlin because of Westbam.
Okay.
And another school says that it's Frankfurt because it's Van Veith. When May Day happened, there was I think May Day is a Berlin thing. So it was May Day and then Love Parade, and then Frankfurt did their own. That was in competition. So they've always had this competition between them, you know. So they're trying to find who the king of German techno is.
Oh, I gotcha.
And then, then you got us Detroit guys. And I mean, I've known Sven and Westbam since the early 90s. I've known them almost as long as I've known Derek and Kevin.
But you guys were creating at the same time?
They were a little after.
A little after you guys.
A little after Derek and Kev. Yeah, and Juan. Definitely way after Juan.
So they were listening to them.
They were listening.
Do we believe that they were listening to what was happening in Detroit?
Yeah.
And then they started creating their own version of it?
They were listening to hot records from wherever they came from. So they weren't locking themselves into just German records.
Right. So they were listening to stuff happening in Chicago and and certainly in Detroit and wherever.
So the whole Belgium scene, where Front 242 ended up going, was based off Chicago. So they were hearing new beat out of Belgium and saying, okay, that's techno. They were hearing, stuff from Detroit. Oh, that's techno. They were hearing stuff from Chicago. Oh, that's techno. It just, everything was techno to them.
Oh, I see.
Anything that had that feel. So, going back to 82, 81 to Liaisons Dangereuses, that's techno. But we saw it as industrial. So Front 242 was industrial. Liaisons Dangerous, Skinny Puppy, Severed Heads, all that was industrial to us. But you could play it on the dance floor. And it's like, okay, that was the segue into playing Larry Heard and to playing Adonis and to all this Chicago stuff.
So it's a very interesting look at how connected all of this stuff really is, all this music, everybody was hearing different things, creating a music that we now know is techno, but we know that just like, you know, cars drive this city and drove the world, the techno scene here drove all of it, I would think. When it's all said and done, you're still going to look at Detroit as the birthplace of techno music.
Sure.
When you go around the world, when you got out of Detroit after you started making music and had a name for yourself, and then you would go out of Detroit, I would imagine that people treated you and reacted to you in such a profound way who had fallen in love with this music. Was it kind of surprising to you because you had been, I would imagine, when you're in your hometown, you're just doing it. You're very insular. You know, people know who you are already. But then you take it, you know, to another part of the world and see that influence. What was that like?
Okay, well, you know, the first instance was when Al Oldham was on here.
I love him.
Yeah, when he was doing his Fast Forward program.
He was. He was the first person to play it.
Yes, he was. So when my first tunes, when I was first doing my tunes on Transmat, Al was playing them. So I was down here at the station and he played From Beyond or one of those tracks.
He and I talked about that one day.
Yeah. And I left here. I had this little green Rabbit, Volkswagen Rabbit, and I'm driving down Cass, excited. The lights come on behind me. It's the Popo 5-0. And I forgot what he said to me. And he's like, and I said, he's playing my song on the radio. He's playing my song on the radio. And the police is like, we don't care.
Right.
You know, here's your $40 ticket or whatever it was at the time, which I couldn't afford to pay. But that was, you know, that's kind of the Detroit thing is like, we don't care what you did. You know, yeah, this fool, he's doing music. He ain't going nowhere.
Yeah, you're on the radio.
You're on the radio. Yeah, you're on the radio. My cousin was on the radio. You know, that kind of thing. So that was the first time when I thought there should be some recognition. When I thought everybody should be as excited as I am.
Right.
Fast forward to me being in London, and for some reason, people were chasing me through the streets. Trying to get my autograph or whatever, because I had a lot of press in the UK.
For sure.
I was in Enemy a lot. I was in The Wire. I was in all kinds of things. And I think this was around the time before Goldie did Timeless. And when Kojo Eshin, who's a very famous journalist, had done the piece of me in The Wire, he played Timeless to me right around the time when I did Land Cruising. And he's like, yeah, you know, these guys are really influenced by what you do. It's like, okay, and I hear it and it sounds amazing, but I didn't really put two and two together at the time that was the start of drum and bass. And that Bug and the Bass Band was a big influence on Goldie. Later on, Ronnie. Ronnie, we had, as part of my residency at Future Club in Paris last weekend before last. You know, Digo and Mark from For Hero, you know, all those guys heard what Goldie was doing, and Goldie heard Bug and the Bass Band at the wrong speed. Really? Yeah, on the dance floor, and was like, okay, you know what? I got it. Kind of like, I don't know if you saw Black Dynamite when they're in Roscoe's, and Roscoe's is called Roscoe's Chicken and Donuts or something. And somebody said, you know, you should have some waffles. And he said, waffles? That's it. It became chicken and waffles.
Chicken and waffles, that's so good. Well, that must have just changed everything for you. I mean, to know that you had influenced so many people in such a profound way. And now you're at this point in your career, and now it's time for you to educate a different generation. And you're doing that. Do you feel a responsibility to tell these stories, to tell this particular story to this next generation? And how are you doing that? And how's it going?
The idea of education, you know, I always tell the story. Like I got kicked out of Cass when I was in 9th grade.
What were you studying?
Well, I mean,
Well, you were in high school.
it was high school, yeah. I got kicked out of Cass in 9th grade because I would go play video games and go to the record store, LaGreen's Records, right up on Griswold. And then later on, we were talking about educating. It's like, hold on, I'm the wrong guy to be thinking about educating anybody, teaching anybody. I didn't want to be in school. And that's when the profound idea was that, you don't want to tell anybody that you're teaching them.
Mm.
Nobody wants to be taught. They want to figure out that they're learning on their own. So whether it's disguised as entertainment, that, this is that argument that teachers should be paid millions because pro athletes are being paid millions. And it's like, Jesus Christ, that just falls flat on his face because, again, nobody wants to be taught. They want to, when they realize they're being taught and they accept it, that's the thing. But if you want to, like, boy, sit down, I'm trying to teach you something. It's like, okay, definitely I want to go in the other room and play video games. So you got to kind of sneak it in.
Mm-hmm.
And my way of sneaking it in is just not even thinking about teaching. It's just sharing my experiences. Sharing experiences is a conversation. People like conversations.
They sure do.
Yeah.
And do you have a lot of young artists seeking you out? Want to know your story, how you did what you did? I mean, you've got a lot of history and you've done a lot of things. And we haven't even talked about your life as a remixing artist, which is a profound body of work for you.
Sure.
But yeah, don't they want to know your stories and how you got to where you are?
At some point when I'm in an old folks home, you hadn't heard from me in 10 years. It's going to be that thing like, yeah, okay, let's search out whatever happened to that Carl Craig dude. God,
It is so not going to happen.
And it was, and it's funny to me because I tell this one too. A friend of mine, Zip, he and Ricardo Villalobos are musical partners and stuff. And I was in Ibiza at Richie Houghton had a villa at the time doing these parties at the villa that one year I think he did. And we're all there and Zip's playing this track that is the most amazing track that I heard in my life. And I'm losing my mind. And I go up to him and it's like, Zip, what is this track? He looks at me like I'm freaking crazy. He's like, this is you. I'm like, what? Huh? And he was playing a remix of Gus Gus, this Icelandic band I did years ago.
Right.
But he was playing it at the slowest speed on the turntable. So it took what I did and it reimagined it. In the same way of hearing Bug at the Bass Bin at 45, this reimagined it at -8 on the turntable. And I mean, I couldn't believe what I was hearing that I had made 10 years or so before. and it was like I'm connecting with the old me and hearing something that I thought I never heard before, but my funk was already my stank was all over it.
That's a pretty great story.
Yeah, so that was interesting. So I like that I can still be influenced by something I did, but that's just reimagined from somebody else that's played in another way. Because like with DJing, it's that way. You can have two records. I could play two records totally different than the way Moody Man would play two records.
Right.
Than what Derek May would play two records at. In comparison to Fabio and Groove Rider. It's like we can say the same thing but in two different ways, and you reinterpret it in whatever way that is. So whatever their stank is that they put on my stank, that's what I heard.
Can you talk about your all black digital and all black vinyl?
All black vinyl, yeah.
Yeah. Can you talk about what that is?
Right. During COVID, that's how it was born. So with Dia Beacon, my piece opened the weekend before everything got shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time when it was being reopened, I'm thinking, no, it got reopened in August or later. And then, still nobody was able to go out, but you could go to the museum. And we wanted to do something to promote all black, or to promote the party after party thing. So I came up with the idea of doing all black vinyl, where celebrating Black History Month, I played one piece of vinyl every day.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really talk about it so much, but I do introduce it and get people to hear it. And that was as a celebration of Black History Month, but also a promotion that we were doing party after party. And each week I'd have a discussion with a different person. And we posted on IG, but also on Dia's IG. So that first year we had Francisco Mora Catlett, who's one of my big influences, Jessica Care Moore. The other two is slipping my mind right now, but mainly it was to celebrate Black History Month and get some eyes on what was happening with what we're doing with Party After Party, and I just kept doing it, and it's something that I fund myself, and that I will take no criticism on. Because if you want to criticize it, then go look at who my corporate sponsors are and you'll see none.
Right, exactly. This is all you.
This is me. We might do in relation, we might, like we've done it with Quest TV.
Right. Oh,
when
yeah.
we went to South Africa. So Beatport and Quest TV. But from what I understand, it was still financed by me. So
it was a labor of love for you.
It's a labor of love.
Yeah,
and it's something
absolutely.
that really needs to be done to celebrate Black History Month, because, what, coming from Detroit, which is, Maricopa Young City.
Yep.
Yeah, we know what that means. So I have to always celebrate, my friends and my influences and myself. The second year we have Amp Fiddler, which is really amazing that we have that.
Yep, absolutely.
With Amp, because we had a lot of discussions with about his early days. I think he played keyboards for Enchantment before he was part of the P-Funk crew.
What a history.
Yeah.
He had
such a big influence on rap. And he doesn't even come from rap, but a huge influence on rap. Yep. So it's great to have that that connection with King Britt.
Oh yeah.
Who does his whole Afrofuturism program at USC. He took over from I forgot his name now. He was with the Art Ensemble of Chicago. Jesus, it'll come later to me. But anyway, he took over the electronic music program and made it into something that's just a huge, impressive beast now.
You certainly created, taken this one thing that you were so known for, and now there are all these different avenues in celebration of techno music and black music, and that's what a little life will get you. You have some time to sort of make these connections and pursue them, and then you have the clout to do it. And that is a great thing to use what you have and your celebrity, if you will,
but you
to highlight these other people.
You have to be able to use your clout in some way or another.
Yeah.
And now everybody's getting attacked for using clout. And it's unfortunate because this is part of what you do within your life to go up the ladder is to be able to bring the people along with you that you really want to bring along.
Yep.
And now it's just so much, so many people that have zero to do with what you do, and they're just ready to pounce. And it's a shame that we're at that point in life that, you know, that you can't reap the benefits without it looking like you're just, you know, trying to take everything for yourself.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Things are definitely different, certainly, than when you started making this music. I have one final question. If you could give advice to people who are embarking on music, especially techno music, and they're entering into that world and are fascinated by what it is, what would you tell them?
Believe in themselves. I say that because I know that 99% of the people are going to fall off. 99% of the people are going to say, you know, I got to get a regular job. There's some things that are going to happen in their lives where they can't do it. You know, whether they have children too young or their parents get on their asses about it, or, you know, whatever the situation, people just end up being naysayers, whatever. And I believed in myself and my abilities, no matter what anybody said. You know, so even with my mentor, Derek May, you know, we had a time where he felt that he was schooling me. Oh, you know, going out on your own is going to be blah, blah, blah. And this is hard out here to do it. It's like, you know, I got to do it. This is what I got to do. And in his way might have been trying to protect me, but in my way, I was protecting myself. So I had to pick one. Am I going to go with what he's telling me to do, or am I going to have to go with what I feel that I can do? And I reaped a lot of benefits from it because believing in myself, I didn't have anybody A&Ring. I was A&Ring. You know, if anybody got to the point where they said that were even acting like they were A&Ring what I was doing, then I would have to let it go because I knew what I was doing. I knew what I was doing could be great. It could have been greater if Quincy Jones produced it, but that was never going to happen. So it's something that for me to do all these remixes the way that I did them, for me to do remixes for them not to send it back and say, do it over again. You know, there were careers that I made for people based on just what I conjured up in my bedroom and then sent to them as a remix, and then it blew up as them, you know. And my view of doing it, because my view of doing it was guerrilla warfare. It's like, I'm going to take your money and press up my own records, you know, and that's how I kept things going. And of course, that's coming down with having a lot of faith in myself and putting faith in yourself. You're willing to put up almost everything you have in order to support it. And again, that's like a 1% thing that's going to happen, is that you're going to be successful at being able to do it, whether you press up 500 records, 3,000 records, 30,000 records, 3 million records, whatever the case is. And, you know, you look at somebody like Berry Gordy, that's somebody who had a lot of faith in himself.
Absolutely.
And he did whatever it took in order to get it to do what they had to do.
It's a pretty great answer. Thanks, Carl. It was great talking to you.
My pleasure.